Hello. Today we're going to be talking about preparing for the autonomous era in ITOps, the high cost of manual, the urgency of autonomous. My name is Jason Kikta, and I'm the Chief Technical Officer here at Automox. I have over 30 years in cybersecurity and IT operations, and I'm a former leader at U.S. Cyber Command. I'm also an alleged expert on state-sponsored and criminal cyber threats, an adjunct lecturer at Johns Hopkins CISO in the 𝗬𝗲𝗻𝗻 Institute, and an adjunct senior technical advisor at the Institute for Security and Technology. So there's a brief overview of our agenda and goals. And without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Here's some highlights from our State of Endpoint Management report for 2026. And the first thing I note is that the numbers have not moved very much, which I think speaks to that these are some really large scale problems that we as an industry and as a community are struggling with, but also due to a lot of structural factors. And the first is only 6% of organizations are fully automated. The remaining 94% still rely on manual or semi-manual processes. I think of automation as a spectrum, and there are probably very few that have completely manual processes. I would guess almost none, right? They probably have a small, modest amount of automation, or they have a heavy degree of automation in one area, but not others. But the bottom line is not where those organizations want to be. And 55% spend 10 or more hours a week on manual, touch labor type tasks for endpoints. And they don't even track those numbers, right? So they don't even have an idea of how much work they are wasting on that when they could be automating that away. 44% cite too many manual processes as a top challenge. Think about that as a top challenge with all the challenges that we as IT pros have making stupid computers work. 44% say too many manual processes are their top challenge, right? That really speaks to the volume of labor and time and attention and probably rework that it consumes. And then they're next to are unreliable automation and understaffing. IT leaders define AEM as AI-driven, self-healing endpoint management with rollback, override, and RBAC guardrails. And we're going to talk more about those later on. So I think time is a new security metric. And this, to me, seems both obvious and a little bit profound, simply because for so long we've focused on completeness rather than speed. And this is the trend that we've seen in security over the last couple of decades, where you have to be faster, and even to some degree, faster and imperfect might be better than slow and steady and 100%. Mean time to remediate has become the defining benchmark for cyber resilience. You have to drive that as low as possible, especially on your external facing assets. Now, this isn't to say that if you miss a few external assets for some, internet eater vulnerability that can get an external attacker, remote code execution inside your DMZ, that you'll be fine. No, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that, for things that aren't subject to public scans, if we're talking about interior endpoints, user endpoints, the threats that they face will not be in the form of a uniform scan, or you've got bigger problems. And so in those cases, the speed that you need for mean time to remediate is really the most important metric. And again, like the whole point of automation is to do what computers do best, that speed, that repetition, that scale, that precision. And that's going to get you as close to 100% as possible, rather than, trying to rely on a mixture of manual or only semi-automated processes. And, that speed, that equals safety, right? It reflects your organization's ability to withstand those threats, because there are some where, there have been some mass exploitation events where I've seen within hours of a proof of concept becoming public that mass exploitation events happen, right? And usually, as soon as there's a bad vulnerability that's announced, it becomes public, it starts to get awareness. You already see bad actors starting to run scans, both state and criminal. They start to run those scans and update their databases of potential targets. So it really can move that fast. Manual management, no longer sustainable. That's the bottom line. Half of orgs patch endpoints in 5 or more days, right? That is a dangerous window for attackers. If you have, again, things that are internet facing, you have mobile assets that, employees are taking out to coffee shops or on trips to touching hotel Wi-Fi, working from home and the potential danger that entails of your corporate asset is now writing the same network as someone's out of date gaming system or Xbox or kid's computer. 55% spend 10 or more FT hours per week troubleshooting, and 2 in 5 spend over 20 hours. Over 20 hours troubleshooting. That's just a massive loss of productivity. And really and truly, like, there are a lot bigger fish to fry in modern IT. There's a lot more work that that team could be doing, probably a lot more enjoyable work too, right? Not just more important, but also better for their quality of life and their enjoyment of their working environment. And so taking away that toil, that drudgery, is what's really critical, in addition to getting the value. 32% spend 10 or more hours on reporting, right? They have to manually rank data wrangle. They have to import from disparate sources and normalize the data, and then build their own analysis on it and build charts and graphs and other visualizations and run calculations. It's a waste. It's a waste of time. And they don't scale. They don't scale, and it slows not only your response time when something happens, but it erodes your visibility of how well you're performing. If you're patching well, you should want to document that so you can take credit for your good work, and you can reinforce the processes that are working well for you. If you're not patching well, you need to know that right away so you can get it addressed. And so if you don't have that visibility, that's really going to impact the state of your security. So why is AEM the way forward? Again, going back to that original definition, AI-driven self-healing solution monitors and remediates endpoints with minimal human intervention. Notice I didn't say no human intervention. I'm a big believer that a machine can never take accountability, right? There was an old IBM manual that said, a machine can never be held accountable, therefore a machine can never make management decisions. And I think that's brilliant. And that was written in, I believe, the 70s. But in that same sense, humans have things that we are really good at: judgment, intuition, experience. Those are not computer qualities, those are human qualities. And so there always needs to be that level of judgment or intuition to go check something out, or experience to tell you that this is going to be a bad idea, or this is what we need to focus on, or to notice when there's been a policy change, so that you go up and go in and update your automation, right? The machine's not sitting in the meeting with you. And that's why we need those guardrails, right? Those guardrails, like role-based access control, overrides, the ability to roll back. Those are what ensure safety and trust in automation, right? Those are really critical to giving you that trust and safety perspective that is going to help you bring in that automation. Because I think one of the biggest blockers to automation outside of tooling is truly confidence. It is a vastly different thing for me to be wrong once on one endpoint. If I am sitting down to help a colleague on their computer and I make a mistake, it's embarrassing, but it's one computer. We will all live on to fight another day. It's not going to be a catastrophic event for the company, no matter whose computer it is. But when I can make mistakes at scale across the entirety of the network, that is daunting. That is psychologically daunting, and it seems very scary. Now, where I think that, where that falls short though is it doesn't take into account. First, I would say the maturity of modern automation tools. Second, the guardrails like we talked about. And I think third, the amount of loss of productivity and value and focus in other areas, like those three things together, they still give you that strong impetus. Life is about balancing risks. Cybersecurity and IT are about balancing risks. Business is about balancing risks. So this is where those teams who are maybe shy about it need to find tooling that matches not only their risk appetite but their ability to automate, and also I think provides that entire continuum of support from strong onboarding to regular solutions optimization sessions to pro services, strong tech support that meets their needs, the ability to get premium support, all those things that help you put on the guardrails, not only like on the slide for the systems, but the guardrails around the human element as well. So this is not about replacing humans at all. It really, really is not. We need to get this augmentation so we can focus on those higher value strategic objectives. I've been doing IT since I was a teenager, and I can tell you, it literally does not matter what you automate away, what you make a background process, what I do not need to focus on a regular basis, and I can just check in on it from time to time. I will still have more work to do. We never run out of work. We're IT. That's the nature of our lives. We never run out of work. And so, we should not focus these discussions on potentially replacing people. These are augmentations, and they make the people more effective, not replace. So what are the right problems to automate, right? How do we think about that? First thing, you want to go after those high friction, high volume tasks. Patching, alert triage, asset visibility. Those are, again, like we talked about, fundamentally inside the sweet spot of what computers do well. They require precision. They require accuracy, which are technically two different things. They require repetition, which we find terrible, and we're not very good at as human beings. And they require scale and speed, right? We can't do things at massive scale, and we certainly can't do them fast if we do those. But a computer can, and that's why you want to line up those tasks with the very best qualities of computers, because those are where you're going to get the most immediate value from automation. Also look at compliance heavy processes. Again, you need that reliability of execution. So reporting, enforcement, building an audit trail, tracking an audit trail, those are all almost mandatory to automate, simply because without automation, you will end up with gaps. Humans are just, none of us are reliable enough to do that without creating gaps. And so automation is almost table stakes there. And then standardization needs, right? Incident response, software deployment, policy application. This is one that I'm personally extremely passionate about. I've long maintained, and when I worked at Cyber Command, I would rant on and on about this, that, I didn't need a new fancier EDR. I didn't need some cool new detection tool. What I really needed was some blankety blank consistency in the network. Because as a security professional at that point in my career, my job was anomaly detection. My job was to go out and look for what was not normal in an alleged sea of normal. But the problem was there was so much configuration drift. There was so much unevenness on what was installed where, on how up to date machines were, that I couldn't tell adversary action from just poor IT practices. And so detecting those anomalies became extremely challenging, and it made the security imperative that much harder. But it was also impacting those IT teams. They weren't doing themselves any favor, because I started out my life in IT. I'm in IT now, and I tell you, the real focus point of IT is troubleshooting, right? Everything in IT at some point or another comes down to troubleshooting and how good you are at troubleshooting, your methodology, your steps, your ability to recall technical details. And it's extremely hard to troubleshoot when you don't know what's different, right? When you don't know why are all the others working and this one isn't, and there's no clear commonality between them. And that just makes it extremely challenging to troubleshoot effectively. And so this concept of commonality and standardization became a big push in IT a long time ago. And a lot of people focused on the other absolute good qualities of this helps us lower costs. This helps us achieve predictable outcomes and some more reliability. I completely agree. But I think the things that we lost sight of are it also helps immensely with troubleshooting on the IT side, with ensuring that we have user safety where users aren't able to inadvertently delete data that's not their own or make mistakes. And it also is a massive, massive boost to security who's out there trying to find those anomalies. So what do IT leaders need to do now? I think it's really just four kind of key things, right? So the first thing is think about the health and security of your endpoints as a business health metric, right? Maybe your MTTR is one of your KPIs. It's one of my KPIs. I think it's a very good one, right? So think about that in those terms, because that makes sense to the rest of the business, right? That's universal language that's understood. And so pick out those metrics that are most important to your efficient operation and socialize those to the rest of the business. Say, these are the KPIs against which we should be judged. Here's where we currently stand. Here's where we want to be. Here's our plan to get there. And then you also have to, build that roadmap to automation. You have to, dig into it and think about it sequentially, maybe even backwards plan it from your goal of this is where we want to be and here's where we are, and where do I want to be right before I reach my objective, and then going backwards from there. A lot of different ways to go after it, but to me, the most successful strategy I've ever seen, at least reliably successful, across a diversity of industry verticals and size of companies, is start small with the quick win, high value things, demonstrate success, build that template for success. And some of them they don't have to be micro small, but on the smaller side, right? Things that are achievable, they're achievable in a short time frame. They build the confidence of the team. They build confidence in the process. They also help bring out any sort of systemic issues that you might expect later, so you can plan for them, and then you can roll back into it and build up from there, right? So you start small, demonstrate success with high value ones, and then you start your upwards ramp through sort of a crawl, walk, run. The entire executive leadership needs to understand that the cost of inaction is far more than they might think it is, right? Those breaches can have major reputational damages. They can have major monetary damages. You can have compliance failures that mean that you can't sell as effectively in the marketplace. There's potential for lawsuits or regulatory action in certain sectors. There's a lot more to it than just inefficiency, and you need to be able to paint that picture to them. And then finally, embrace the AI-driven tools. Again, I'm very middle of the road on AI. I am neither doom and gloom, nor am I starry-eyed that it can do everything and be all things to all people, but it is a fantastic assistive technology. It augments the ability of us as humans to get things done faster and in some cases more reliably. And so, find those use cases that make sense to you, that you well understand, and you can move to the more advanced stuff later on, right? But that also helps you, like it says there, build out the clear policies, oversight, and training that you need to manage that, because just because AI is useful doesn't mean it should operate with no guardrails either. Thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciated the opportunity to do this talk, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed giving it. So I'll see you next time.